Hello, everyone. It's Tiana Wolford, the CEO of SC Red, and I am so excited to launch our Changing the Narrative series. For far too long, we as individuals with sickle cell disease have had to prioritize survival over quality of life, but this is our opportunity to change that.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Amy Klug, and I am a board member for SC Red, and I am here with Taylor Kane, who is an advocate for ALD. Taylor, would you like to tell us a little bit about ALD advocacy and how you came to it?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Amy. I'm really glad to be here. In 2003, sorry, let me start over. In 2001, my dad was diagnosed with a rare genetic disease called adrenoleukodystrophy, or ALD for short. ALD is most popularly known from a movie in the 90s called Lorenzo's Oil, which is based on a true story. A lot has changed since then, but at the time my dad was diagnosed, my mom and my family didn't know anything about ALD. It was a big shock to all of us. And ALD is a neurological disease, so it has no effective treatment or cure. So over the course of the next 2 years, my dad lost the ability to walk, to talk, to swallow. He had to have a feeding tube, and he developed really severe early onset dementia, and then passed away when I was in kindergarten when I was 5. At the time of his diagnosis, we also learned that ALD is an X-linked disease, which means that it's carried on the X chromosome, and that my dad passed his X chromosome to me. All fathers pass their X chromosome to their daughters, and that this meant that I was a carrier of the gene. At the time, we were told that I didn't have anything to worry about, that ALD only affected males and that females were just carriers, but that when I went on to have kids one day, I would have a 50% chance of inheriting this condition, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. Before my dad passed away, he and my mom worked together to start a nonprofit organization called Run for ALD. At the time, ALD research was still somewhat in its infancy, and my dad knew that it would be too late for him, but he really still wanted to raise money and be able to donate it towards research. So they started that, and my dad participated for 2 years. My family actually still holds a yearly event to raise money, but that was really my first taste of getting involved in advocacy. I was really young at the time, so I didn't get more involved until I was in middle school when I would start to sing at the yearly events. I don't sing anymore now, but I did back then. I would also go around to the classes in my school and tell them about our upcoming fundraiser and encourage them to come. And then I noticed that people actually showed up. And I feel like that was the first time it clicked in my mind that, if you put the word out there about something you cared about, that people would actually listen. And I remember going to the whiteboards in front of the class and writing out adrenoleukodystrophy, and I was so impressed with myself that I could spell it. And I remember talking to my fellow classmates about it, even at a really young age. And that's what really kind of catalyzed me to, over the years, just getting more involved, like in telling my dad's story. And then as I went to high school, more involved with what it meant to be a carrier of ALD. I knew that I was a carrier for as long as I can remember. But in high school, my mom had me meet with a genetic counselor who talked to me about my, risk when it came to having kids. I also met with one of my dad's specialists for ALD who said that that women carriers were actually at risk for developing symptoms at the time, which was over 10 years ago now, was thought to be really rare. Now we know that 90% of carriers actually do develop symptoms. But in high school is when I started getting more involved in what it meant to be a carrier. I started attending ALD conferences along with my mom and turning to social media to meet others in the ALD community. And it all really spiraled from there. In 2017, I started Remember the Girls, which is a nonprofit organization that's dedicated to carriers of all X-linked conditions, because I learned that issues that carriers in the ALD community face, such as being seen as just carriers and being seen as only asymptomatic, was something that was happening in a lot of other X-linked diseases, like Duchenne muscular dystrophy, for example. So over the course of my advocacy, I've gotten to meet a lot of brilliant advocates and learned so much from them. And I know that this is something that I'll be doing my entire life.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing. It's so clear that your love for your dad inspires your work. He sounds like an amazing man, and I was wondering if you have a favorite memory of him that you'd like to share.
That's a really good question. So unfortunately, I don't have a lot of memories firsthand from when my dad was alive, and most of the memories I do have are from when he was sick. But to me, that's not necessarily a bad thing. My mom made the decision to keep my dad in our house on hospice care, even though a lot of people told her that it would be traumatizing to me and my brother. I'm so glad that I had that time to spend with my dad, um, because otherwise I would literally not remember him at all. I would say that my favorite memory is probably, I remember this very lightly, but I've also heard it told to me so many times. But when my family was in the mall, we were in a shopping mall, and at this time, my dad was in a motorized scooter, and he was suffering from dementia at this point, but not very severe yet. And my mom went to go into another store and left me and my dad just outside the store, telling me to stay with my dad. And I think me being, 4 years old at the time, I kind of took advantage of the situation and I just fully ran away from him. And they had to call mall security, and I was found in Claire's, the jewelry store, like pulling a bunch of earrings like out of the packets. And, you know, I don't know, I just look back at that and I just think that that's a funny memory, like me being young, and just, knowing that my dad wouldn't be able to chase me, because he was in this scooter, and just being like, all right, I'm going to do what I want to do. That's the first one that comes to mind.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. Um, so I know that with genetic diseases, there's always a lot of progress being made, especially now as we know more and more about how our genes interact. Can you tell me something happening in the ALD research that you find really exciting right now?
Yeah, definitely. We have a lot of exciting things happening in the ALD research space. There's a few different clinical trials that are going on right now for different manifestations of ALD. So ALD actually most typically affects boys between the ages of 5 and 10, and they usually have the most severe set of symptoms. So a lot of the research is focused, on finding a treatment for these boys since ALD is fatal. The only option right now is getting a bone marrow transplant, which a lot of times, isn't always successful or comes with a lot of risks and complications, but, still can be beneficial for the ALD community. However, they're studying different types of therapies like gene therapy. There are also probably the most exciting research to me, is for the adult onset version of the disease called AMN. It's basically the symptoms of ALD without the brain involvement, so without like the dementia and behavioral changes, without the cerebral symptoms. They're researching to try to understand how some men with AMN do eventually develop the cerebral symptoms of the disease. Because right now they have no idea. About 40% of men with AMN go on to developing the cerebral symptoms. So like my dad, I do say he had ALD, but technically he had AMN with cerebral involvement.
Okay.
And so they're trying to identify pathways or certain risk factors that make men more likely to develop the cerebral symptoms. And I think this will be great because if they can identify who's at risk, then they can give them, a treatment or some sort of intervention, so that they won't go on to develop those cerebral symptoms. Because I think the hardest part of my family's experience with ALD just really came back to my dad's severe dementia and behavioral changes. I think it was definitely confusing for me at a young age, you know, seeing my dad act like extremely erratically. At the time, my mom says I actually enjoyed it, and I thought the things that he did were more comical, if anything. But I just firsthand, I saw like how ALD can really devastate the brain and change everything about a person. And I think if, research could show, how we can identify those men who are at risk for the cerebral symptoms, it would just be amazing.
Yeah. are they doing any research for women and, carriers of the gene?
Yeah, so there is research going on for women in the ALD community. Unfortunately, we're not included in a lot of research studies just on the basis that we are women with the ALD gene. And, I think in a lot of circumstances that can make sense. Women do not, or 99% of the time, will not go on to get the cerebral form of ALD. And I understand the urgency that comes with treating the most severe form of the disease. But, I do hope that women will start being included in more research studies and eventually clinical trials. For example, the symptoms that women in the ALD community experience are actually really similar to the symptoms experienced by the adult male patients with AMN. They actually used to call females with ALD females with AMN, but they no longer do for a few different biological reasons. But the symptoms are quite similar. And I would love for, more women with symptoms to be included in those AMN research studies. And I think that's really important because say that a drug or a treatment gets approved for AMN. I know that some of our doctors have said that this drug may be able to be used by women with symptoms off label. But since we haven't been in the study, since women haven't been in the study population, there are biological differences, when it comes to, biological males and females and taking certain treatments. And I think there presents a danger if women are told they can take this drug, but the drug hasn't been tested on the female or body with two X chromosomes. So I do hope that for that reason, that more researchers and more pharmaceutical companies will think to include us. And that's something that I personally advocated for all the time. I'm also involved in a natural history study for ALD. So I did an at-home study where I was recorded doing different walking exercises. And over the summer, I'm going into the Kennedy Krieger Institute in Baltimore to do an MRI, blood work, and a few other tests. And I believe this is going to be a few-year study. So it's definitely a big commitment, but I personally want to help advance research however I can, especially as someone who is young, and I'm 23 and I don't think I have any symptoms yet, but I know my chances of getting symptoms are really high. I feel like if I don't do this right now, if I don't work to just help contribute to research, that decreases my chance of having a treatment when, I get older. So it's something that's really important to me to be involved in research.
Yes, I completely understand. And I think women generally, there's been a long history of women being left out of research studies and of studies studying medication, but then not dosing it properly for women. And so, I mean, it's obviously just a broader problem, but then in a field like ALD, where the impact is mostly felt by men, it makes sense. But also, if women are having symptoms, then they need to be included. Um, it's it's just, I think in the rare disease communities, we always run up against this, right? There's just not enough money to go around. And if there were enough money to go around, maybe we could all get studies, but there's always a shortage, right? So one thing I'm wondering, I see that you've been involved with newborn screening for ALD, and I've also seen that newborn screening is not nationwide yet. Am I right in that? Because I looked it up. Yes.
Yeah.
For sickle cell, it's only recent. I think 2006 is when it finally went nationwide for newborn screening, but we still don't have newborn screening nationwide for things like alpha and beta thalassemia, which contribute to the way that sickle cell is impacts the body. So as things like for the sickle cell community, one thing that kind of pushed that is that we found out that early penicillin intervention could make a huge difference. And so there was a reason to make sure we knew who had sickle cell early. So I'm wondering, as stem cell transplants and gene therapy treatments become more widely available for young men with ALD, do you think that will help prompt the spread of newborn screening? Has that been something that's been useful for you as you advocate?
It has definitely. All the available therapies right now, so a bone marrow or a stem cell transplant, do need to be done as early as possible, but not too early. So boys who are diagnosed with ALD, say through newborn screening, it's important for them to be monitored and get a yearly MRI I think actually every 6 months to see if there's any change on the MRI, which shows that their brain is starting to, be affected by the disease. And literally when that's detected, they're, told that they should get a transplant immediately, pretty much. And that will be the best possible outcome if they do it immediately. And the reason that they just don't do this to all babies, boys born with ALD, is because, a decent percentage of these boys with the ALD gene will actually bypass the childhood version and, like my dad, get a later onset version of the disease. So they wouldn't want to take the risk of doing a transplant, in infancy, or, in the first few years of life, when a male could, live up until he's, say, 40 or 50 without any effects. But detecting ALD early, regardless, is incredibly important. I mean, if that is a complete game changer for ALD. And even after my dad was diagnosed, the bone marrow transplant was actually brought up, but my family was told that it was just way too risky because my dad's brain was just too far progressed. And I just can't imagine the sinking feeling my mom and dad had to hear that their only option, that it was just too late, and that they literally had no other choice but to just wait and let the disease, take over his body until he passed away. I think newborn screening is such an incredible public health movement. And we have, really in the ALD community used that early intervention potential as a way for a lot of states to pick up newborn screening. So ALD actually has, I think, spread pretty fast, especially in the last couple of years, and even despite the COVID-19 pandemic. Unfortunately, there is still some red tape. Like in New Jersey, for example, my home state, I helped advocate and have a bill for newborn screening proposed in New Jersey that was signed into law in 2013. And New Jersey is actually still not screening for ALD, while a lot of other states will pass the bill and they'll start screening that same year. And I've tried so many countless efforts to see, and I've brought doctors in, I brought professionals, I brought legislators to approach the State Department of Health in New Jersey and ask, why aren't you screening? What do you need? We will get you whatever you need. And they just don't really have an answer. And it's been so frustrating because it's gone on all this time. And I just can't help but think of, the boys and even the girls, because, ALD does detect carriers, not as high at a sensitivity level as it does affect, boys with the disease. But it does pick up carriers on the screening test. So I just think of, all the people that have been missed in the last, almost decade that this bill has been a law, but just hasn't been followed. And one more thing I wanted to add about newborn screening is when it comes to screening for carriers and for baby girls, there's definitely a little bit of controversy. And I can understand this from one angle, in the fact that newborn screening is intended, for childhood versions of the disease, childhood diseases where children need an early intervention, and that could change the course of their condition and the course of their life. But our specialists were able to basically convince stakeholders in newborn screening to screen girls in newborn screening, because since ALD is an X-linked disease, like a lot of inherited diseases, it often just goes through that family line. And they argue that by detecting carrier status, a carrier status can then help a whole family get diagnosed. And in that family, there could be various boys who don't know they have ALD yet, but now can get tested and can potentially get a bone marrow stem cell transplant. I think it's also great because it can help, a mother identify that she is also a carrier of ALD. So if she does want to have any additional children, she can make the family planning choices that are right for her. So I see where potential controversy comes from, because it does, fall a little bit outside of the scope of newborn screening. But I mean, to me, I only see positives. I think, it's a benefit for people to know that they're carriers of ALD, knowledge is power. So I'm excited for ALD to sweep across the nation. Hopefully that does happen in the next couple of years.
Thank you for sharing that. So what is one thing that you wish more people knew about ALD?
When it comes down to it, I wish that more people knew that women with ALD are not just carriers, that many of us, about 90%, do eventually get symptoms of the disease. I also wish that people knew that these symptoms can actually be quite severe. I know a lot of women with ALD who their entire lives have changed because of their symptoms. They're definitely not mild by any means. Um, you know, I wish people would look at ALD and all other X-linked diseases and see them more as a spectrum rather than diseases that affect males and don't affect females. I think we should see them more as a spectrum of people who are affected, um, because there can be men with a male, a man or a boy with an X-linked disease who actually has less severe symptoms than a female who's considered a carrier. So we know it's just not as black and white as it once was described. Um, so all in all, I want people to know that women with ALD are not just carriers.
Thank you. I was so interested to learn about ALD. I'm going to admit that I'd never heard of it before, but so I really appreciate you taking the time to share this with us, because I think we can always benefit from learning more about the things that the people around us are struggling with. So can you tell us a little bit about the support system that you rely upon, and what advice you would give to others who find themselves facing a rare disease carrier diagnosis, for finding support or creating it if they can't find it?
Definitely. I think the first person that comes to mind is definitely my mom. She of course is not a carrier since I inherited ALD from my dad, but my mom has always made sure, even from a young age, that I understood my carrier status and that I wasn't scared of it. She really took the time to explain it to me over the years. She would draw out, X chromosomes and Y chromosomes and explain to me what being a carrier meant for my future. She also takes a really active role in keeping up on research and things like that as well. But the other part of my support system is definitely my Remember the Girls community. So, as I mentioned, I founded Remember the Girls in 2017. It is a nonprofit organization, but we do have a Facebook support group with over 1,200 carriers from over 30 different X-linked conditions and over 30 different countries in the world. Um, and I know this was my first thought when I started learning about other X-linked conditions. I was just like, wow, this is not just an issue in ALD. This is an issue that affects all X-linked conditions, and it really comes down just to the X chromosome. Like, it comes down to that biological basis and different biological processes like X activation and things like that. And I think when women join this group, they're not only find themselves, in a group that's incredibly supportive, diverse across many different conditions, but also that they can relate to women with these rare diseases that they've never heard of before. They can meet someone in Alport syndrome, for example, and they may have never heard of Alport syndrome, and Alport syndrome could be a totally different type of disease, but they can still relate over the fact that they don't like being called a carrier, or that, they want to go through IVF with PGT, but insurance won't cover it because, you know, it's not seen as necessary for them. Or just the guilt and the stigma and the other psychosocial side effects associated with being a carrier. I think all those relationships can definitely be found within Remember the Girls. I specifically love talking to other young adult ALD carriers. Um, there's a handful of them, but some of my friends like Tessa, Olivia, Veronica, there's only a few of us because most women do find out their carrier status after passing it down to a son. So there are only a few of us who are lucky to have this information now. But I definitely find support in them getting to talk about the things that not only impact ALD carriers, but also impact us as a young ALD carrier, like talking about, it in terms of romantic relationships and things like that. So I find a lot of comfort in them. And I'm looking forward to, us all being to get together in person one day. We're actually all from different countries, except for I've met Veronica, she's in Slovakia, but Olivia's in England, and me and Tessa are in the US, and there are a handful of us, just other countries in the world. So I would love for us to be able to get together one day, and be able to really relate about these things in person. But until then, just chatting on Facebook, video chat, texting, it definitely just makes me feel like they understand. Like, one last thing, even though my mom is the most supportive person ever, I think she knows that she'll never know what it's like to be in my shoes. Like, she knows a ton about ALD. She was there to watch my dad, suffer with the condition, but the only people that can really get it are the people who just have walked the same path as you. And that's why I find so much comfort in talking to these other like 20-something-year-old carriers, because I just know that they get it. Like, without even saying, we just know that we have this special connection that like is just intrinsically there, just because we have this same, ALD mutation. Like, we're just connected in that way.
I'm so glad that you found it. I know that for so many of us in the sickle cell disease community, that our support groups are huge in, helping us make sense of what's going on and talking about what's going on in the research world, and, finding new treatments and all of those things. But mostly what matters is the support and having people who are going through what you're going through. And it's just so helpful.
Definitely.
So one thing that we struggle with a lot in the sickle cell disease community is we find ourselves dealing with a lot of grief, because we lose a lot of people who are so important and so integral in our communities, and so many dear friends. And it seems like this is obviously more frequent than it is with like other social groups. So I'm assuming that you in the ALD community are dealing with that same phenomenon. So what do you find most helpful for dealing with these inevitable losses that shake our communities so frequently?
That's a great question. Yeah, this is definitely something that does impact the ALD community, and many other rare disease communities. And in my personal family, we've lost, a handful of people to ALD, not just my dad, but also my uncle and cousin before I was born, and just extended family members. But I think when something, in the ALD community, when we do lose someone, and we actually did just lose one of our top leader advocates in AMN. He did recently pass away, and it definitely was, a time of grief for everyone in the community. And I feel like the main thing that our community did was, one, get together on social media, because that's just what we do, and I know that's what many other rare disease communities do. But just remember, like, the positive things about that person. Like, this man in particular was a really strong advocate. I had met him in person many times at different ALD Connect conferences. So, I just would think back to those times and try to, think positively, while also letting it, re-energize you to keep pushing for those treatments and keep pushing until there's not a day where another person with ALD passes away. Like, even though most of my advocacy is focused now on X-linked carriers, always, in my heart and in my mind is pushing for ALD treatments, because, I really want to live to see the day where no boys or men pass away from ALD anymore. Like, I know that that's what everyone wants with their condition. I know that, but like, ALD advocacy, and specifically treatments for boys and men, after losing my dad, is just so close to my heart. And that's something that I want so badly. And while my advocacy does focus on a more niche topic of X-linked carriers, ALD really does, have my heart. Like, it's literally in my genes. It's a part of who I am. So.
Thank you. So we all come to our rare disease communities as a result of a devastating diagnosis, which I don't want to downplay, but we also often find healing and hope within our communities. Can you share a silver lining from your ALD experience with us?
Definitely. I think the main silver lining from my ALD experience is being able to know from a young age that I have like a passion in my life. I know that this passion in my life of advocacy is born out of tragedy, and I fully understand that. But I do feel grateful that, I wake up every day and feel truly committed to this mission in my life to, advance research for ALD, but also, help carriers of X-linked conditions. I don't think most people at 23 are able to say that. And, I know it's hard to look at my life and wish and think like, what if things were different? Like, who would I be without ALD? I think a lot of my identity is wrapped up in it in a way. But, while of course I would wish that I weren't impacted by ALD and that my family was not impacted by this disease, I know that ALD has given me a purpose and a drive that I don't think I could find anywhere else. And yeah, I mean, I love the rare disease community. I can't say I love like being a part of the rare disease community because I don't think anyone wants to be a part of it, but I do love the rare disease community and all the people that I've met and that I've learned from and that just have the same drive for advocacy as I do. Like, it's just so invigorating. And I just, I wake up every day and do feel grateful in a way for being in the rare disease community. A community that no one wants to be in, but it is a great community nonetheless.
Yes. Well, if we could just all get a cure, then we could have our community without the disease.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the goal.
Mm-hmm. So thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us. I think that so many people who are watching this who have sickle cell will really resonate with a lot of the things that you're talking about, because so much of it is, very parallel to the experiences that we have. I do have one last question, which is kind of a silly one, but I'm a little jealous because you note in your bio that you spend several months of the year in the UK. And so I'm very curious what you're doing there and, how come you get to do that?
Yeah, no, that is a really good question. I'm actually there right now. My boyfriend lives in England, so I spend part of the year in England just doing my work and my advocacy from here, and then spend part of the year at home in New Jersey. Yeah, I'm very fortunate to be able to do my advocacy from anywhere, but it's great getting to spend, some time overseas.
Mhm. So when you're there, what do you miss most about the US? And then when you're in the US, what do you miss most about the UK?
When I'm in the UK, I definitely miss most about the US the food. The food here is really different. It's a lot like healthier, which is good, obviously, but like when you go to McDonald's here in the UK, it tastes completely different than in the US. So I definitely miss the food. When I'm in the US, I probably miss like the nature. My boyfriend lives in a village, which is kind of similar to a neighborhood, but a little bit more rural. There's a lot of them in England. And there's just so many great walks to take. There's literally like cows and sheep roaming around. And I live in total suburbia at home in New Jersey. So I live off of a main road, so I can't walk anywhere. So I definitely miss just being able to take walks in nature. But I love traveling in general. And, I hope that eventually one day through Remember the Girls, able to meet a lot more of our members that are living outside the US or even in other parts of the US. Like, there's people that I've been speaking to for years that are on the Remember the Girls board that I've never met in person. So I just can't wait for the day that happens.
Hopefully soon, right? We could all be traveling soon again. All right. Well, thank you so much. It was so nice to meet you, Taylor. And do you want to just say again the names of the organizations that you work with so that people, and maybe their website, so people could find them?
Yeah, definitely. Well, if you want to follow me on social media, my handles for Twitter and Instagram are at Rare Like Her. And if you want to get in touch with Remember the Girls, our website is rememberthegirls.org. And then you can find all of our social media linked on there. If you want to get in touch with me about anything, you can send me an email, taylor@rememberthegirls.org. And I'm really grateful for the experience to share here. And, I think it's so important that we realize that, our conditions might be different, but that there's a lot that we can, relate on and have in common at the end of the day. And a lot of us are fighting towards similar goals. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Taylor.
For more information, you can follow us at www.sicklecellred.org.